Yeah, cool. So I'm Matt Jarvis. I am the Director of AI Operations at a company called Snyk. Snyk are a UK cybersecurity company. We build a platform to help people detect and remediate security vulnerabilities in lots of different places in their code, in their platforms, etc. I think probably for the purposes of this talk, to give you a concept of what Snyk looks like as a company is going to be useful for a bit of context here. So we're about 1,400 people. We are globally distributed, and so not tiny, but also not gigantic either. So today I'm going to talk a bit about our internal AI transformation program at Snyk, how we kind of got started along this path, where we're at now, and hopefully some of the lessons we've learned along the way. I've deliberately left this talk a little bit short, so there's plenty of time at the end for Q&A, because I think probably in this kind of context of these sort of case studies, it's going to be some of the most valuable things, I hope. Right, so where did our journey begin? So in the Snyk products, we've always been heavy users of machine learning and AI. But about a year ago, I was tasked with looking at how widespread adoption of AI internally at the company could improve our operational efficiency. And I'd been, prior to that, one of the leaders of our developer relations organization at the time, and we'd actually been very heavy users of OpenAI right from the start. And so that's why I think I ended up kind of being voluntold that this was something that the company wanted me to look at. And since then, we've been building out this internal function to leverage generative AI right across the company to support all of our different operational groups. And, obviously, I don't have all the answers, most definitely, but there might be a few things that we've kind of gleaned along the way that could hopefully be useful. A significant proportion of this talk isn't actually about AI technology at all, and I think that's probably one of the key points that I want to make as well, that a lot of technology transformation problems end up really being about people and process and how you do things as an organization, which is probably not quite as cool or shiny as people like to hear for these kind of things, but that's the reality of these kind of programs. So one of the first things I did really was to sit down and think about what's the purpose of our AI program, to really distill down that into a vision, something simple that we can then kind of work outwards from, and something we can get folks to kind of buy into. And I think having that shared understanding of what you're trying to do is really key to starting to do actual delivery of these things. If you're not in agreement about the end goal, then you're never really going to be able to kind of coalesce folks to go on this journey with you and sort of move things forward. And there's kind of two, at least two kind of vaguely competing viewpoints that you need to balance here. From the executive perspective, you need to be able to demonstrate that investment in a particular thing is going to deliver results, deliver actual business value to the organization. And then from the staff perspective, you're going to have some folks who are going to be worried that AI is going to take their jobs. So you've got to be very delicate in how you balance both of those viewpoints, and to be able to take both of those constituents, with you on the journey. And this is our vision statement. It's not at all flashy or radical, but it just distills the kind of purpose of what the program is trying to do into a single sentence. It's relatively easy for people to remember, and it's kind of our starting point. It's our kind of North Star that we refer back to in everything we do. And, you're going to end up sounding like a stuck record with these things about repeating this kind of message over and over again, but that's kind of really part of the process, I think. And so, we spend a lot of time socializing this message with all of our stakeholders so that we can be relatively confident that we're all aligned with the direction of travel and what the end goal is. So from that point, once we've established that kind of vision statement, we can start looking at how do we actually get to our goal. And for us, we ended up landing, thinking about this problem in terms of these three pillars: strategy and governance, enablement and education, and consulting engineering. And I'm going to talk about each of those three areas separately, but I think the big point that I wanted to make in this slide is that we really felt that without all three of those things happening at the same time, that it was going to be very challenging to reach the kind of goal that we wanted. So all three of those are equally as important in terms of driving that program forward. So if we take a look at strategy and governance first, I think one of the important things for me here is that AI is obviously, especially generative AI, relatively new field, and it often doesn't fit into the kind of workflows that we've created and developed within our organizations. It's not just like buying traditional software, because the way that it works is kind of fundamentally different to the patterns that we're used to when we consume software. There's data flows inwards, data flows outwards, and there's new material being generated, which makes the terms and conditions much more complex than how we've procured software in the past. And inside our organization, we kind of reached a point where we were stuck in that our existing procurement and risk frameworks just couldn't handle the sort of the complexities of this, and folks who work in those kind of highly delineated kind of parts of the organization, their typical position if they don't understand something or think it's excessively risky is literally to just stop, because obviously they have their neck is on the block for that. So that meant that teams weren't really being empowered to take advantage of AI tools, because it was really difficult to actually get access to them to even try things out. So one thing you might be asking yourself is, why is governance for AI any different than your other security policies that you've got in place already? And in lots of ways it isn't, and that's really the point. But what we've also seen is that people are far more likely to do things with generative AI than they would do with tools they're more familiar with. So whilst it might be fairly obvious that if someone, for example, was to leak your private source code onto the internet, that would clearly be something that people would expect to be reprimanded or whatever for. For some reason, when people look at Gen AI tools, the same idea doesn't compute that that's exactly the same thing. And so, that's a big generalization, but I think, there's definitely been examples of that where people don't have the same thought process behind the risks of using generative AI, particularly multi-tenant SaaS Gen AI. And then the other kind of complexity, and this is particularly focused on the kind of the legal aspect of this. So under the terms and conditions of most AI providers, particularly when you're actually paying them money, is that you have legal clauses about inputs not being used for training the original model, and about ownership of inputs and outputs and the generated content. And legal folks generally tend to be very wary about the potential for your data ending up in training sets, clearly because that may be returned in results from other things. But these platforms, especially the SaaS ones, are generally black boxes that we don't get very much insight into how they're working behind the scenes. And the generated outputs piece is also very complex. It gets very muddled with when vendors have AI solutions which are actually powered on the back end by a third-party provider. Clearly in my terms and conditions with OpenAI, I own the inputs and outputs, and I own the generated content. If a vendor that I buy an AI service from is then using AI on the back end, and they have not transferred those in their terms and conditions to me, then who owns the generated outputs? And that's, that can be very complex from a legal perspective in terms of clarifying ownership. And there's clearly potential liability issues as well, depending on where those outputs are used. If you pass them to customers, it causes issues for customers. You obviously have liability. So all these issues of data flow, of ownership of inputs and outputs, of liability, can be very tricky to navigate from a risk perspective. When you're looking at suppliers or looking at kind of what architecture might be appropriate for a particular project. So our first step here was really to assemble the folks within the company who know most about AI. As many other people have said over the last 2 days, deep expertise in AI is extremely scarce, it's very hard to hire, and it's extremely expensive. So the best place to start, in my opinion, is to look inside your company, kind of find the folks to get you started. In lots of cases, you don't actually need super deep expertise just to get going along this path. And getting going, I think, is the kind of important bit. Find the smart folks who have an interest and set them to learn more about it. As a kind of side note a bit on people and skills as well, I think it's a reasonable assumption to assume that, as with most kind of emerging technologies, the skills to operate those technologies are going to become more accessible over time. So the demand for that super deep understanding will gradually decline as those technologies become more commoditized and be sort of replaced by a need to train everyone more generally on how to use things. In our organization, that whole piece that I've just talked about takes the form of a cross-function AI advisory board, which looks at all of our internal AI use cases, approves new projects, approves procurement, and it consists of folks from legal, from InfoSec, from our product and engineering teams, as well as from procurement, so that we have AI expertise spread right across those functions. And we create a whole governance model, we have regular meetings, Slack channels, processes, all that good stuff. But the overarching goal right from the start was actually to empower people to be able to use things and not be a function to do computer says no, which has in some kind of risk scenarios can kind of end up in that place. So our governance model specifically says that we are focused on empowering people to do things safely. And I think the other aim here is to kind of put guardrails in place to stop the growth of shadow AI. In almost every size of organization, it becomes very difficult to actually stop people from doing anything. What you really need to do is train them and have well-socialized policies and processes in place, which at least kind of make people think before using it for anything that might be dangerous. So in parallel with that, we kind of looked at what our general strategy might look like for AI tools. At the time, we had some folks who kind of viewed AI as like a zero-sum game. We'll just get an AI tool and we'll give that to everybody and that'll be it. But that kind of doesn't work in my view when you start to think about the problem space. When the risk factors for AI are really dependent on the classification, the type of the data that you want to put into them, and where you use the outputs. So you need to be thinking about what that means in terms of how you might consume it. And we think about these broadly, these kind of 3 different consumption models for most of our internal AI. The first is, the AI features built directly into, provided by vendors. And there's a spectrum here from, simple AI features in things like Slack and Atlassian, right through to actual platform features that you can build on top of in platforms like Salesforce or Snowflake. And then the second one is obviously that you kind of hosted multi-tenant LLMs, OpenAI, Gemini, etc. And then the third one is really custom-owned and hosted in-house, so privately hosted models on our own infrastructure. And our guiding principle when we look at what model is appropriate for what particular use case is what's the classification of that data, where does that data actually live right now. We would prefer not to move data around everywhere, particularly when it's sensitive data, so leveraging things close to where the data is becomes important to us. And, overall, we expect to have projects that right across all of those different consumption models. So it's very much not a zero-sum game. And what's important for us is that we have a clear definition of what the thought process is behind each of those things, with the guidelines on how we use things. And we try to provide sort of paved roads for people to take advantage of each of those different consumption models. So our second pillar, and probably the most important one in my view, I think, is our education and enablement piece. I think if you're serious about creating organizational change, then just buying software with AI in the title of it doesn't actually do that. That just creates consumers. What we're really interested in is changing mindsets, so that when people think about a problem in their work, they immediately think, can I use AI to help solve that problem or to automate the solution? And we talk a lot about creating a culture of experimentation as being kind of key to that change. And to do that, we need to both educate people about the realms of the possible and also democratize access to tools so that people can try things out safely. This is still a work in progress for us, but some of the things that we've done in this kind of arena are all hands generative AI kind of 101 type training sessions for right across of all our worldwide offices. We have got a plan in place to build out an AI champions program, very much similar to how people have security champions, where we have within each line of business, we have folks who understand that line of business and can be the champions for AI solutions to those problems. We're looking at visiting speakers programs, and we've started working on access to tools. We provide access to things like Gemini and OpenAI to the whole company, and we're in the planning phases of building out an internal AI platform with private LLMs, where people can experiment with more sensitive data within our own security boundary. And the third pillar is a new consulting engineering function. And what this is all about is being able to rapidly prototype AI applications and then move them forward into production. In lots of organizations, you don't have spare resource capacity just lying around. That's the nature of how organizations work. And so we, specifically wanted to have a function where we had that spare capacity to be able to kickstart this program. And the word consulting becomes very important here. As part of this, we spend a lot of time across the organization uncovering use cases and then translating that into projects. And this is very much shifting sands, almost always extremely loosely defined requirements. And so if you do this, you kind of need people who are comfortable with those kind of situations, comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you like. And we started very small with this function, with the aim of selecting projects that can very quickly show value to the business and therefore drive further investment. And there's a few different places where you can likely find opportunities. Hopefully, you folks are going to be familiar with some of these things. Gen AI models are broadly good at a whole range of things here, from content generation to knowledge retrieval, classifying things into buckets, and data analysis and summarization. But the real challenge is that people often don't know what they don't know. And so it's impossible in any organization of size for one team, i.e. my team, to understand how everybody does every workflow. So, consulting with those teams, educating them about use cases, and then asking them if they have work that they think fits into any of those categories is a big part of the work. Again, as I started out by saying, this isn't, that's not shiny or exciting work, but it's the kind of core I think, going about this stuff. I mean, you need to have real use cases that deliver real business value, because otherwise you're kind of dooming yourself to fail. And you'll likely find a lot of potential opportunities as you start to look for places to start. But a few things that I think we've kind of learnt along the way is not to do lots of proof of concepts. It would be very easy for my team to have spent an entire year doing proof of concepts that are entirely invisible, and basically, it was great, we got to play around with some shiny stuff, but we didn't actually deliver anything that had any impact. And so looking for things that have a very clear definition of done and a measurable output. Staying out of critical delivery pathways at a very early stage is also kind of important. There are lots of unknowns when you're starting down this road of building AI applications. And so what you don't want to be doing is blocking other people's projects, other people's work streams. So start small, standalone projects with clear outcomes and identifiable business value. So being able to measure success is really critical. And the other thing is to kind of try and keep the scope contained. So you're not trying to boil the ocean on the first try. And the low-hanging fruit is typically knowledge retrieval applications, so-called retrieval augmented generation, where we can get LLMs to answer questions about our own internal documentation. And these can really drive significant value in lots of organizations. If we think about the research that says interruption to flow state takes 30 minutes for someone to get back into flow state. If someone has to ask a question and someone has to answer a question, you've got two 30-minute states there straight away that you can assign a cost to in terms of what was the resource cost to having to do that. Even if you assume a fairly conservative cost of like $50 or something for each one, at scale those numbers become very significant. And that doesn't take into account lost opportunity cost. In lots of organizations, it's also your internal experts who have to end up answering those questions. They're the most expensive people. So not having those people answer questions is a good thing. And a lot of people have this idea that generative AI is just black magic, and if you chuck enough stuff into an LLM, you're going to get good stuff out of it. In reality, that's completely not true. The garbage in, garbage out principle applies very strongly in our experience. You need decent quality documentation to get good results, and good results drive your organization's engagement with your applications. If folks get incorrect stuff, they stop using it. And the other critical thing for us is the importance of feedback loops. So we consider it like a forcing function to improve the back-end data that's going into these things. I'm just keeping an eye on time here. I'm going to skip slightly. It's also important to think about how you market things. So internal marketing. If you don't have any users, then that's also a failure. Don't be scared of banging your own drum, repeating yourself ad infinitum, and boring people. It just goes with the territory. So where are we now? Well, we have several AI systems in production, including RAG systems that have answered nearly 5,000 questions, I think, when I looked yesterday, around 300 to 400 questions a week with accuracy rates at around 98%. And that's what I mean when you think about those numbers about how much potential resource saving, that is quite substantial. And that's what's really driven further investment in the team. So the team's 2 people at the minute, expanding to 4 at the start of next year. And we've got a backlog of around 40 projects, in our backlog. So there's no shortage of work to move forward with. And where do we want to be? Well, I think we're just at the start of this journey, really. Our end goal is to kind of build AI into the company DNA. And we need to widen our training, building AI into our learning pathway so everybody has access to training, not just around AI safety, but around things like prompt engineering. And, I'm really focused on giving people access to tools, particularly for sensitive data. That is where some of the most valuable insights are inside any company, and data about your sales, data about your customers. And so giving people paved roads where they can easily experiment with that is super important. We've got a long way to go, but kind of hopeful that we've planted the seeds to be successful. Well, that didn't end up being very short, actually. I think I said a lot more words than I planned to, but thank you for listening.